There are corners of this planet where the normal rules of survival simply no longer apply. Places where the ground wants to swallow you, the water wants to pull you under, and the air itself becomes something you can't trust. These aren't myths. They exist right now. Some of them have people living in them, working in them, dying in them every single year. What's stranger is that life keeps pushing back. Plants grow through acid. Communities build homes over open ocean. Climbers walk across ice that moves while they sleep. The Earth keeps throwing everything it has at whatever dares to stay, and somehow, something always does. You're about to visit the most extreme, most dangerous, and most unbelievably real places on this planet. Some are beautiful. All of them are terrifying. None of them should exist, but they do. Kilauea Volcano, United States. Located on the Big Island of Hawaii, Kilauea sits in a category entirely its own, not because it explodes the loudest, but because it never really stops. This is one of the most continuously active volcanoes on Earth, covering roughly 14% of the island of Hawaii, with around 90% of its surface shaped by eruptions over the last 1,100 years. What makes Kilauea so unique and so genuinely terrifying is that it doesn't give you warning the way most volcanoes do. There's no single catastrophic moment to brace for. Instead, it destroys steadily, methodically, relentlessly. Rivers of molten rock creep across roads, forests, and neighborhoods at walking pace, giving you just enough time to watch everything burn before it reaches you. That slow inevitability is somehow worse than an explosion. In Hawaiian tradition, the Halemaʻumaʻu crater, sitting at the heart of the volcano, is the sacred home of Pele, the goddess of fire. Her temper isn't expressed in single bursts of rage, but in long, sustained fury. Ancient chants describe her lava flows as divine will-made physical, reshaping the island according to her design. That framing fire as judgment rather than accident gives the volcano a mythological weight that science alone doesn't capture. The numbers are just as staggering. Lava fountains at Kilauea have been recorded shooting nearly 580 meters into the sky, more than 3 times the height of the Washington Monument. When molten lava reaches the ocean, it doesn't simply cool and stop. It creates what scientists call lays, a toxic aerosol of hydrochloric acid and tiny glass particles that can damage lungs within minutes of exposure. It's one of the few places on Earth where fire and ocean create something more dangerous than either one alone. Standing near an active flow, you feel the heat before you see the light. The ground rumbles in low, irregular pulses. The air smells of sulfur and something electric, like a storm that never arrives. Cracks appear in the cooled black crust beneath your feet, and through those cracks you can see the orange glow of what's underneath rock that was solid minutes ago, still moving. Kilauea is a reminder that the Hawaiian Islands aren't finished being built. Every eruption adds new land to the coastline, extending the island inch by inch into the Pacific. The volcano isn't just destroying, it's creating. It's been doing both simultaneously for thousands of years, and it will keep going long after we're gone. Andina, crossing the Andes between Chile and Argentina sounds like an adventure. Paso Los Caracoles turns that adventure into something considerably more honest. This is a road carved into the side of a mountain range that genuinely does not want to be crossed, featuring approximately 29 switchbacks with no guardrails separating your vehicle from drops that disappear into cloud. At its highest point, the road climbs to roughly 10,500 feet above sea level, an altitude where engines lose power, brakes overheat on descent, and human judgment starts to get fuzzy from thin air. Snow regularly accumulates beyond 6 feet, turning already narrow stretches into an icy corridor that trucks must navigate in convoy, their headlights forming a slow metallic procession through the gray. Cargo convoys here are something to witness. Heavy freight trucks move in single file, each driver fully aware that there's no room to correct a mistake. The road was built out of necessity, not convenience. For decades, it served as one of the primary land connections between Chile and Argentina, and the mountains didn't offer any gentler options. Is absolute attention. Not the kind of attention that most driving requires, where your mind can drift and the guardrails will catch you. Here, every curve is a negotiation between the vehicle's mass, the road's grade, and the 1,000-foot nothing just outside the passenger window. Have seen decades of accidents, delays, and rescues. But they've also seen something else: the daily movement of goods, people, and commerce across one of the world's great mountain ranges, sustained entirely by the willingness of drivers to keep going up. Kovendinsky Bridge, Russia. Deep in the Siberian wilderness, the Vitim River has to be crossed somehow. For the residents of remote villages along its banks, somehow turns out to be the Kovendinsky Bridge, a decaying iron railway bridge that was never completed as designed, was never built for cars, and has nevertheless been used by both for decades. Stretches roughly 570 meters and hangs 15 meters above the water. It has no safety barriers. The deck is only slightly wider than a standard vehicle. The iron structure has been exposed to Siberian winter's temperatures that routinely hit -40 degrees Celsius for so long that sections of it have become genuinely unpredictable. Drivers who have made the crossing describe it as something between extreme focus and controlled terror. This isn't an adventure destination for most of the people who use it. It's the only reasonable route to cross the Vitim without a detour of hundreds of kilometers through wilderness terrain. The villages on the other side depend on it for supplies, for medical access, for connection to the rest of Russia. The bridge is both obviously dangerous and genuinely necessary, which is a combination that defines a lot of extreme infrastructure around the world. Become a challenge, one of those places where people drive across, filming themselves to prove something. But for the people who cross it in winter, carrying groceries or driving sick relatives toward distant clinics, there's no performance involved. It's just the bridge. It's just what you have to do. Saltstraumen Strait, Norway. Off the northern coast of Norway, something extraordinary happens 4 times a day. As tidal forces shift the water between two fjords through a narrow channel, barely 150 meters wide, a current builds to speeds of around 37 kilometers per hour, producing what are widely considered the most powerful tidal whirlpools on Earth. The Saltstraumen Strait has been inhabited since the Stone Age. Archaeological evidence of human settlement dates back roughly 11,000 years, suggesting that people have been watching these whirlpools form and dissolve for as long as there have been people in this part of the world. The Norse likely passed through here on longships, reading the tides with the precision that deep familiarity with dangerous water requires. Peak flow, the water surface tears apart. Jade-green waves spiral into black rotating disks, pulling everything in their circumference downward. Small boats are prohibited from entering during maximum tidal flow for obvious reasons. The force is strong enough to crush and capsize vessels that misjudge the approach. Even watching from shore, the sound carries a physical weight. It's not just noise, it vibrates in your chest. For experienced technical divers, Saltstraumen is one of the most extraordinary underwater environments anywhere on the planet. The rushing current carries nutrients that feed an unusually dense and diverse marine ecosystem, fish, invertebrates, and kelp forests that thrive precisely because the water never stops moving. But the entry window for diving is measured in minutes. Miss the slack tide, and the current returns indifferent, overwhelming, absolute. K2 Base Camp, Pakistan. The Karakoram Range in northern Pakistan contains some of the most hostile mountain terrain on Earth, and K2, the world's second highest peak, and by most measures its most dangerous, sits at its center. Base Camp, at approximately 5,150 meters above sea level, is where climbers stop being tourists and start being supplicants. The approach itself takes days. Routes cross-shifting moraine fields, those unstable, jumbled landscapes of rock and glacial debris that shift constantly underfoot. Every step requires reading the ground, because the ground keeps changing. Ice hidden beneath loose rock collapses without warning. Streams appear and disappear. The scale of the surrounding peaks makes every human figure look accidental, like something that wandered into a landscape that wasn't designed for it. At base camp, the thin air forces the body into a slow renegotiation. Simple movements, standing up quickly, climbing a short slope, produce a disproportionate cardiovascular response. The body is adapting, but it never fully adapts. Above 5,000 meters, altitude is always an adversary. What strikes most people at K2 Base Camp isn't the fear, it's the silence. The scale is so large, the distance to the summit so apparent, that something changes in how you think about what you're attempting. Many climbers describe a recalibration here, a recognition that confidence and preparation are necessary, but not sufficient. The mountain decides. Drachenstieg, Sky Ladder, Austria. Suspended between two sheer limestone faces in the Austrian Alps, the Drachenstieg Sky Ladder is exactly what it sounds like. A steel cable ladder, roughly 40 meters long, dangling in open air between cliffs with nothing beneath it but several hundred meters of alpine void. Installing the ladder required workers to hang in midair from ropes while anchoring heavy steel cables into solid rockwork that demanded both extreme technical skill and an apparently limited sense of self-preservation. The result is a structure that sways continuously with every step, creating a kinesthetic sensation somewhere between flying and falling. From the ladder's steel rungs on clear days, you can see the valley floor far below as a patchwork of green and gray. The Alps stretch in every direction. Cloud formations move through the gap between the cliffs, sometimes passing directly over the ladder, surrounding climbers in white before clearing. It is, objectively speaking, one of the most visually spectacular things you can experience in the mountains. It is also deeply, viscerally unsettling in a way that photographs don't convey. The movement of the ladder under your weight, that constant swaying response to every shift of your body, removes the usual reassurance of solid ground. You are not standing on a mountain. You are hanging between two of them. Mount Everest, Nepal. The highest point on Earth sits at 8,849 meters above sea level in the Himalayan range along the Nepal-Tibet border. Everest is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its surrounding ecosystem encompasses glaciers, high-altitude valleys, and biodiversity that exists nowhere else on the planet. Above 8,000 meters, what climbers call the death zone, the human body begins to fail in predictable ways. Oxygen saturation drops to levels that impair judgment, slow reaction time, and accelerate muscular deterioration. Decisions that would be straightforward at sea level become effortful and uncertain. The cold is severe enough that frostbite can develop within minutes of exposed skin contact with metal equipment. The glacier systems on Everest are in visible motion. Crevasses open and close seasonally. Seracs, those massive ice towers that can weigh thousands of tons, collapse with no warning. The route changes every year because the mountain is not static. What was a safe path in April may be a crevasse field by May. Weather on Everest operates on its own schedule. The narrow windows of calm between the winter jet stream and the summer monsoon, typically a few weeks in May, represent the only realistic summit opportunities for most expeditions. Outside those windows, wind speeds at the summit regularly exceed 100 miles per hour. More than 300 people have died attempting to summit Everest. Many of their bodies remain on the mountain, preserved by the cold, visible from the standard routes. They are both a warning and a kind of testimony, evidence that the mountain demands everything and sometimes takes it anyway. Mount Huashan, China. In Shaanxi Province, China, Mount Huashan rises as a cluster of granite peaks connected by some of the most genuinely dangerous pathways in the world. The mountain is sacred to Taoism. Ancient monks carved the staircases, ladders, and plank paths into the cliff faces entirely by hand, using hammers and chisels to connect the 5 summits for spiritual practice. To reach the highest points, climbers ascend thousands of stone steps cut directly into near-vertical rock faces. Some sections consist of wooden planks approximately 30 centimeters wide attached to iron bolts hammered into sheer granite. There are no lateral barriers. The drop to either side of these planks can reach nearly 2,000 meters. Rusted iron chains provide the only handhold. The paths are actively used. On peak tourism days, traffic flows in both directions simultaneously on walkways barely wide enough for one person, with people facing each other on a ledge above space, negotiating passage with careful sidesteps. The mountain requires full focus, not the performative focus of an adventure activity, but the actual, complete engagement of every faculty. What Huashan offers in return is extraordinary. Views across the Wei River Valley, ancient temple structures clinging to cliff faces, and the strange spiritual atmosphere of a place where people have been making dangerous climbs as acts of devotion for over 1,000 years. Mad Honey Cliffs, Nepal. High in the Himalayan foothills of Nepal, the Gurung people have been practicing one of the world's most dangerous honey harvests for over 2,000 years. The honey they collect comes from the Himalayan cliff bee, the largest honeybee species on Earth, which builds enormous hives on sheer rock faces at altitudes above 2,500 meters. The cliffs at Lamjung, where much of the harvest takes place, rise over 300 meters from the valley floor. Gurung hunters descend those cliffs on handmade rope ladders, carrying long poles to dislodge hives while being actively swarmed by thousands of bees. There are no harnesses. There is no safety net. The rope is the rope, and the cliff is the cliff. The honey itself is pharmacologically active. The Himalayan cliff bees feed heavily on rhododendron flowers that contain grayanotoxins compounds that, in sufficient quantities, cause hallucinations, dizziness, low blood pressure, and potentially cardiac arrest. This mad honey has been traded as a medicine and intoxicant across Central Asia for centuries. For the Gurung, the harvest is not an extreme sport. It's a cultural institution, one with its own prayers, its own tools, its own traditions passed from father to son across generations. The danger is acknowledged and respected, not performed. The men who descend those cliffs aren't chasing adrenaline. They're doing something their ancestors have always done, in the same place, in the same way. Danakil Depression, Ethiopia. In the Afar region of northeastern Ethiopia, the Danakil Depression sits nearly 100 meters below sea level in one of the hottest places on Earth. It is also, by any reasonable measure, one of the most alien-looking landscapes on the planet's surface. Geothermal vents push mineral-rich water through the ground, depositing sulfur, iron, and salt in formations that turn the landscape yellow, green, orange, and white. Acid pools shimmer in colors that don't look real. The smell is overwhelming. Sulfur, brine, something chemical and sharp. The ground in places is a crust over superheated water, and the crust is not always reliable. Camel caravans still cross the Danakil salt flats, as they have for centuries. Local Afar traders mining salt blocks by hand and transporting them north on camelback, a trade route that has operated continuously since ancient times. This is one of the few places in the world where a traditional economy that's thousands of years old continues to function in an environment that would kill an unprepared visitor within hours. Temperatures in the Danakil regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius in the shade. There is no shade. The combination of toxic gases, extreme heat, acid pools, and unstable mineral crusts makes it genuinely one of the most hazardous environments accessible to human visitors, and yet people have lived and worked here in this specific landscape for millennia. Death Valley, United States. In southeastern California, Death Valley holds the record for the highest air temperature ever reliably recorded on Earth, 56.7 degrees Celsius, measured in 1913. The valley floor sits below sea level, surrounded by mountain ranges that trap hot air and radiate heat from dark rock surfaces throughout the night, preventing temperatures from falling the way they do in most deserts. The landscape is varied and, in its own way, extraordinary. Salt polygons crack the valley floor in geometric patterns that extend for miles. Dunes shift position with each windstorm. Mud flats dry into intricate surface patterns after rare rains. The colors shift through the day: pale white at midday, deep purple and orange at dawn. Rare rainfall events create something almost miraculous. Temporary shallow lakes form on the valley floor, reflecting sky and mountains, then evaporate within days and leave fresh mineral deposits. The 2005 super bloom, when an unusually wet winter triggered mass wildflower germination across the valley, attracted visitors from around the world to watch color return to a landscape that typically exists in tones of gray and brown. But the heat is the defining reality. At peak summer, the asphalt roads reach temperatures that can blister skin on contact. Metal surfaces become untouchable. The air itself is a physical presence, pushing back against movement. Multiple people die in Death Valley every year, usually from heat exposure, often after underestimating how quickly the environment degrades the human body's ability to function. Norilsk, Russia. 300 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, Norilsk is the northernmost city of its size in the world and one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Built in the 1930s by forced labor under the Soviet Gulag system, the city was constructed specifically to exploit the enormous nickel and copper deposits beneath the tundra. Winter temperatures in Norilsk regularly reach negative 50 degrees Celsius. Polar night, the period when the sun doesn't rise at all, lasts for 2 months. The permafrost beneath the city requires all buildings to be constructed on elevated pilings, preventing the heat of habitation from melting the frozen ground and destabilizing foundations. Without this engineering adaptation, the city would slowly sink. The industrial output of Norilsk smelters produces approximately 1% of global sulfur dioxide emissions. The sky above the city carries a permanent yellowish tinge. The rivers around it have, at various points, turned red from chemical leaks. Vegetation within the immediate industrial zone has been essentially eliminated by acid precipitation. and yet more than 175,000 people live here. They are born here, raise families here, grow old here, in a city that shouldn't be able to sustain human life but does, because the infrastructure supporting it is enormous, and because the deposits beneath it are among the richest in the world. Oymyakon, Russia. In the Sakha Republic of northeastern Russia, the small settlement of Oymyakon holds the record for the lowest temperature ever recorded in a permanently inhabited location, approximately -67.7 degrees Celsius, though unofficial measurements have gone lower. The town sits in a shallow valley that traps cold air, producing winter temperatures that make the surrounding region look almost mild. Daily life in Oymyakon requires continuous adaptation. Vehicles are kept running overnight because letting engines cool to ambient temperature makes restart nearly impossible. Fuel gels, metal contracts, batteries lose capacity. Schools operate unless temperatures fall below approximately -55 degrees Celsius, which communicates something about the local threshold for too cold. Buildings are constructed on deep pilings into the permafrost. Ground burial of the dead is difficult because the frozen soil must be thawed with fires before graves can be dug. Plastic becomes brittle enough to shatter at handling temperatures. Exhaled breath freezes before it disperses, creating a constant personal fog. The local diet centers on protein and fat reindeer meat, dried fish, fermented products because the caloric demands of maintaining body heat in extreme cold are substantial, and because the ground doesn't permit agriculture for most of the year. The community has adapted so thoroughly to the cold that aspects of it seem almost normalized, though the baseline conditions remain among the harshest in which humans have chosen to permanently live. Khumbu Icefall, Nepal. Between Everest Base Camp and Camp I lies one of the most objectively dangerous sections of the standard Everest route, the Khumbu Icefall. This is where the Khumbu Glacier descends a steep section of mountainside, breaking apart as it moves into a chaotic landscape of seracs, crevasses, and ice blocks that can be 10 stories tall. The glacier moves approximately 1 meter per day. This means the route through the icefall changes constantly. Ladders placed over crevasses one morning may span open air by afternoon as ice shifts and opens new gaps below. The Icefall Doctors, a team of Sherpa specialists hired each season by climbing expeditions, spend weeks placing and replacing the aluminum ladder systems that allow passage through the terrain. Most climbers move through the icefall before dawn, when the cold maintains structural integrity in the ice. As temperatures rise with daylight, seracs become unstable. The sound of ice shifting, groaning, cracking, the sudden percussive boom of a distant collapse is constant background noise that the body eventually learns to parse. Is that structural failure nearby, or just settling far away? An avalanche in 2014 killed 16 Sherpa guides in the Khumbu Icefall, the deadliest single incident in Everest history. It forced a reconsideration of risk distribution in high-altitude mountaineering that continues today. The icefall is unavoidable on the standard route. There is no safe path through it, only paths with varying degrees of risk. Mount Nyiragongo, Democratic Republic of Congo. In the Virunga Mountains of eastern DRC, Mount Nyiragongo sits above the city of Goma with a lava lake in its crater that is, by volume, the largest in the world, containing an estimated 250 million cubic feet of molten rock in near constant circulation. What makes Nyiragongo particularly dangerous isn't just the eruption risk, it's the lava's chemistry. The low silica content of the magma gives it an unusually low viscosity. It flows faster than nearly any other lava on Earth, with speeds recorded at up to 60 kilometers per hour during major eruptions. For comparison, most lava flows move at speeds that allow walking evacuation. Nyiragongo lava moves at highway speeds. The 1,977 eruption killed an estimated 2,000 people. The 2002 eruption sent lava flows through Goma, destroying hundreds of buildings and forcing 400,000 people to evacuate. The 2021 eruption killed 32 people and created seismic instability that continued for weeks. The deeper hazard at Nyiragongo is carbon dioxide invisible, odorless, heavier than air. It accumulates in depressions and hollows around the volcano, and in sufficient concentrations, it suffocates without warning. In 1986, a CO2 release from nearby Lake Nyos, a different geological system, but the same principle, killed 1,700 people in a single night. Nyiragongo carries the same risk over a city of 2 million. Komodo Island, Indonesia. In the Nusa Tenggara Island chain of eastern Indonesia, Komodo Island is the primary habitat of the Komodo dragon, the world's largest living lizard, reaching up to 3 meters in length and 90 kilograms in weight. These are not oversized lizards that happen to get big. They are apex predators that have been evolving in isolation for 4 million years, and they behave accordingly. Komodo dragons hunt through a combination of ambush, persistence, and venom. Their saliva contains anticoagulant proteins that prevent wound clotting, and recent research has confirmed the presence of venom glands that contribute to prey immobilization. They can detect blood from up to 9 kilometers away through olfactory sensitivity. They will wait, they will follow, they will outlast. The island's terrain, dry savanna hills, steep ravines, limited tree cover, offers almost no natural protection from an animal that can run at speeds of 20 kilometers per hour over short distances. There are roughly 1,700 dragons on Komodo Island and several thousand across the surrounding islands. They are concentrated, adapted, and thoroughly territorial. Tourist visits to the island are permitted under ranger escort, with strict protocols for maintaining a safe distance. Rangers carry forked staffs rather than firearms. The dragon is a protected species. The dynamic of walking through terrain where an animal that could kill you is concealing itself nearby, and the only thing between you and it is a stick, tends to clarify the mind considerably. Kawah Ijen Volcano, Indonesia. On the eastern tip of Java, Kawah Ijen contains one of the most extreme environments on land, a volcanic crater lake filled with approximately 36 billion liters of sulfuric acid. The pH of the water has been measured at 0.5, roughly equivalent to battery acid, capable of dissolving metal and causing severe chemical burns on contact. The volcano produces continuous sulfur dioxide emissions that condense around the crater vents and ignite at night, creating what's commonly described as blue fire, not the lava itself burning blue, but sulfuric gases igniting at the surface, producing electric blue flames up to 5 meters high that run in rivers down the crater walls in the dark. Sulfur miners work inside this crater. They descend into the acid gas environment carrying ceramic pipes to channel sulfur flows, then break the cooled yellow sulfur into blocks and carry it out in baskets loaded to 80 to 90 kilograms, multiple ascents per day, on steep crater walls, breathing air that requires improvised cloth masks that provide inadequate protection against the fumes. The average life expectancy of sulfur miners at Kawa Ijen is significantly reduced compared to the regional population. The combination of acid gas exposure, extreme physical exertion, and altitude creates a health burden that compounds over years. They do it because the pay is better than available alternatives. The beauty of the blue fire they work inside of is, for them, incidental. Cave of the Crystals, Mexico. 300 meters beneath the Chihuahuan Desert of northern Mexico, the Cave of the Crystals houses the largest natural crystals ever documented, individual selenite formations exceeding 11 meters in length, estimated to weigh up to 55 tons each, that grew over approximately 500,000 years through mineral-rich water heated by an underground magma chamber. The cave sits inside a lead and silver mine operated by the Peñoles Company, which pumped groundwater out of the cave beginning in 2000, revealing it for the first time in human history. When the pump stopped, the cave flooded again. Access to the cave when drained was brutally limited by conditions. Air temperature inside is approximately 58 degrees Celsius, with nearly 100% humidity, a combination that saturates the body's cooling system within minutes. Without specialized refrigerated suits, human survival in the cave is measured in approximately 10 minutes. Research teams wore ice-filled suits that extended safe exposure time to roughly 45 minutes. The crystals themselves are extraordinary by any measure, not just large but perfect, translucent columns of white and gray selenite, some taller than buildings, their geometric faces reflecting light in all directions. The cave looks designed rather than natural. It looks like something from a dream. It also looks like a place that would kill you without particular notice, which it very nearly would. Catacombs, France, beneath the streets of Paris, extending through roughly 300 kilometers of tunnels and galleries, the catacombs hold the remains of approximately 6 million people, the bones of Parisians from the 14th century through the early 19th century, transferred from overcrowded city cemeteries, beginning in 1786. Public entrance is named the Gate of Hell. The walls of the ossuary sections are constructed from bones, femurs, and skulls, arranged with deliberate geometric precision into patterns that manage to be simultaneously orderly and deeply unsettling. The temperature holds constant at around 14 degrees Celsius year-round, which contributes to the atmosphere without fully explaining it. The city above the catacombs is built on limestone quarried from these same tunnels over centuries, which means the foundations of Paris sit over a network of voids. Sinkholes have occurred periodically throughout the city's history, and engineering surveys continue to monitor the subsurface stability of sections beneath major buildings and roads. Beyond the official tourist sections, an estimated 300 kilometers of tunnels remain, some mapped, some not. A subculture called cataphiles has explored these spaces for decades, navigating by hand-drawn maps through areas that officially do not exist. These are people who feel that the underside of a city is as worth knowing as its surface, and who are willing to navigate complete darkness and genuinely disorienting spatial complexity to prove it. Death Road, Yungas Road, Bolivia. The North Yungas Road descends from the Bolivian highlands near La Paz to the Amazon basin, dropping nearly 3,500 meters in elevation over a distance of approximately 64 kilometers. The road averages about 3 meters in width. Most sections have no guardrails. The cliff edge drops several hundred meters directly to the valley floor. Waterfalls cross the road at multiple points, not around it, across it. In wet season, visibility through waterfall crossings can drop to near zero. The road surface is gravel and mud, which becomes slick immediately after rain, which is frequent at altitude. The road earned its informal title through statistics. Estimates suggest it was responsible for roughly 200 to 300 deaths per year at its peak, a figure consistent enough to prompt systematic road safety interventions, including construction of an alternate paved route that most commercial traffic now uses. What remains on the original death road is a significant mountain biking destination, where riders descend the same drops that once claimed vehicles, moving fast enough that the exposure is continuous. Small wooden crosses mark the sites of fatal accidents along the route, dozens of them, concentrated at particularly dangerous corners. Rusted wreckage remains visible in the valley below at a few locations, a testimony to what happens when the gravel shifts at the wrong moment. The Sundarbans, India, Bangladesh. Straddling the border between India and Bangladesh, the Sundarbans constitute the world's largest mangrove forest, approximately 10,000 square kilometers of tidal channels, mudflats, and dense coastal woodland where the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna rivers empty into the Bay of Bengal. It is the only forest in the world with a significant population of Bengal tigers that regularly hunt humans. Between 50 and 100 people are killed by tigers in the Sundarbans every year. Fishermen, honey collectors, woodcutters, people whose livelihoods require entering the forest, which requires entering tiger territory. The tigers here have evolved in an environment where humans are rare and small compared to the deer and wild boar they typically hunt. They have apparently concluded that humans are not significantly different. Beneath the tidal channels, saltwater crocodiles reach up to 7 meters in length. The tides rise to 3 meters twice daily, flooding channels and transforming familiar landmarks into submerged obstacles. The mangrove roots grow upward from the mud pneumatophores, designed to breathe through tidal submersion and form a dense, shin-catching tangle through which movement is exhausting and directionally confusing. The Sundarbans are also among the most climate-vulnerable ecosystems on Earth. Rising sea levels are progressively inundating low-lying islands, reducing habitable land for the tigers, the wildlife, and the estimated 4 million people who live in the Sundarbans region. The forest is being consumed from the edges inward. Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, Ukraine. On April 26, 1986, reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine underwent an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction that destroyed the reactor building and released a radioactive plume that spread across Europe. The release was estimated at roughly 400 times the radioactive output of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The immediate exclusion zone, a 30-kilometer radius around the plant, was evacuated within days. The city of Pripyat, built specifically to house plant workers and their families, was abandoned in 36 hours. Its 50,000 residents were told to bring 3 days of supplies. Most never returned. Today, the exclusion zone covers roughly 2,600 square kilometers. Some isotopes present cesium-137, strontium-90 have half-lives of approximately 30 years, meaning meaningful radioactive contamination will persist for centuries. Others, like plutonium-239, have half-lives measured in tens of thousands of years. What has happened inside the exclusion zone in the absence of humans is one of the most closely studied ecological experiments of the 20th century. Wildlife has returned in enormous numbers: wolves, bison, lynx, eagles in populations exceeding those in comparable, non-contaminated areas. Trees grow through apartment windows. Streets are reclaimed by moss and saplings. The zone demonstrates, uncomfortably, that the absence of human activity may be better for wildlife than the presence of radiation is bad for it. The Chernobyl New Safe Confinement, a massive arch structure installed over the damaged reactor in 2016, now contains the radioactive debris under controlled conditions. But the question of what to do with the site over timescales of tens of thousands of years remains unanswered. This is a problem without historical precedent and, for now, without a solution. Ilha da Queimada Grande, Snake Island, Brazil. Approximately 33 kilometers off the coast of São Paulo, Ilha da Queimada Grande is a small, forested island that is almost completely uninhabitable for humans, not because of its terrain, which is moderately challenging but navigable, but because of its snakes. The island hosts one of the highest snake densities ever recorded anywhere in the world, dominated almost entirely by Bothrops insularis, the golden lancehead viper. Estimates of the population vary, but studies have suggested densities of up to 5 snakes per square meter in highly active areas. The snakes are endemic to the island and found nowhere else in the world. golden lancehead evolved on an island where the primary prey are birds. Its venom is correspondingly potent, adapted to act quickly enough to prevent prey from flying away before the toxin takes effect. The venom is hemotoxic, tissue-destroying, and considered several times more potent than the mainland lancehead species from which it's descended. The Brazilian Navy controls access to the island, which is essentially prohibited for civilians. The only regular human presence is a periodic lighthouse maintenance team, and stories of what happens when those visits go wrong are the kind of thing that spreads through maritime communities. The island has been studied from a distance far more than it has been entered. Lake Natron, Tanzania. In the Arusha region of northern Tanzania, Lake Natron sits at the southern end of the Eastern Rift Valley, a shallow, highly alkaline lake fed by geothermal springs that produce water saturated with sodium carbonate, sodium bicarbonate, and calcium carbonate. The pH can reach 10.5, equivalent to household bleach, and the surface temperature in shallow areas can approach 60 degrees Celsius. Animals that land on the lake's surface, birds, bats, insects that miscalculate, are quickly preserved by the alkaline water in a form of natural calcification. Photographer Nick Brandt documented dozens of these calcified animals in 2013, including herons and eagles preserved in the exact postures of their final moments, coated in mineral deposits that turn them stone gray. Widely circulated and deeply unsettling because of how precisely the animals were preserved. Wings spread, feet extended, as if frozen mid-motion. Despite its lethal chemistry, Lake Natron serves as the primary breeding ground for roughly 75% of the world's population of lesser flamingos. Flamingos have evolved physical adaptations: thick, scaly skin on their legs, specialized bills for filtering alkaline water that allow them to use the lake as a refuge that virtually nothing else can access. The predators that would target their nests can't survive the environment that surrounds those nests. The lake's toxicity is the flamingo's protection. Lut Desert, Iran. In southeastern Iran, the Lut Desert, Dashti Lut, holds the record for the highest land surface temperature ever measured. NASA satellite data has recorded surface temperatures reaching approximately 71 degrees Celsius, not air temperature, but ground surface temperature, which is technically distinct, but equally lethal to any organism in contact with it. The Lut Desert was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2016 for its exceptional geological formations. The most striking are the Yardang's elongated ridge formations carved by wind erosion that align in parallel rows across the desert floor, some reaching heights of over 75 meters. Seen from altitude, these formations look like enormous parallel waves, as if the desert surface is in motion. The central section of the Lut is called the Gandum Berrian, the toasted wheat, a dark basaltic plain where virtually nothing lives. No insects have been documented there during heat season. No visible microbial life on the surface. It is, within the parameters of Earth's biosphere, about as close to a dead zone as the planet produces at its surface. Navigation through the LUT requires planning around thermal extremes. Ground that looks stable may be loose sand that sinks underfoot, or compressed salt that fractures unpredictably. The absence of landmarks across large sections makes orientation dependent on instruments rather than observation. The desert is not particularly dramatic to look at, mostly flat, mostly brown, but its lethality is encoded in its physics, not its appearance. Fraser Island, Australia. Off the coast of Queensland, Fraser Island is the largest sand island on Earth, 122 kilometers long. Composed almost entirely of sand but supporting a full rainforest ecosystem, perched lakes of extraordinary clarity, and one of the few places where trees grow over 200 meters tall, directly from a sand base. The island's complexity is ecological. It combines a genuinely unusual landscape with a remarkable concentration of hazards. The offshore waters host great white sharks and irukandji jellyfish, a thumbnail-sized species whose venom causes progressive systemic effects, including severe muscle cramping, hypertension, and pulmonary edema that can be fatal. The freshwater lakes are safe, the surrounding ocean is not. The island's pure dingo population, genetically unmixed with domestic dogs, unlike most Australian dingo populations, is considered the most behaviorally intact wild dingo population remaining. They're also increasingly bold around tourists, having been inadvertently conditioned to associate humans with food. Dingo attacks on people, while uncommon, have caused fatalities, including the death of a 9-year-old child in 2001. Medical evacuation from Fraser Island takes longer than from most developed areas. The island has limited road access, no bridge connection to the mainland, and its interior tracks require four-wheel drive vehicles. A serious snakebite, jellyfish sting, or shark attack in a remote section of the island is, in practical terms, a medical emergency occurring far from medical care. La Rinconada, Peru. At approximately 5,100 meters above sea level on a glacier in the Peruvian Andes, La Rinconada is the highest permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. The city exists for one reason: gold. The mountain below it contains significant deposits, and the mining operations that extract them have drawn a population estimated at 50,000 to 70,000 people to an altitude where the atmosphere contains roughly half the oxygen available at sea level. The physical environment of La Rinconada is extreme in every dimension. Cold as constant temperatures regularly fall below -20 degrees Celsius. The snow and ice surrounding the city are year-round features. Altitude sickness is endemic, not occasional. Nearly everyone living there experiences some degree of chronic hypoxia, which affects cognition, stamina, and long-term health. The working conditions in the mines compound this. Mercury is used extensively to amalgamate gold particles from ore, an effective but highly toxic process that produces methylmercury contamination of local water sources and contributes to neurological damage in exposed population. Studies have documented elevated mercury levels in both miners and community residents. The city itself, shantytown structures of corrugated metal and timber, no formal sanitation, no central water supply, no functioning waste management exists in a state of infrastructure deficit that reflects both the altitude's constraints and the economic marginality of artisanal mining communities worldwide. It is a human settlement pushed to the outer edge of what human physiology can sustain, held there by the economics of gold. Mount Merapi, Indonesia. On the border of central Java and Yogyakarta, Mount Merapi is one of the most active and dangerous volcanoes in the world, erupting on average every 4 to 5 years, with significant events in 1994, 2006, and most severely in 2010. Merapi's structure produces a specific type of eruption event called a pyroclastic density current, a superheated mixture of gas, ash, and rock fragments that travels down the volcano's flanks at speeds up to 700 kilometers per hour at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. There is no running from this. There is no shelter from this unless that shelter is a significant distance from the mountain and built specifically to resist it. Pyroclastic flows incinerate everything in their path: trees, buildings, vehicles, organisms, in seconds. The 2010 eruption killed 353 people and forced the evacuation of 350,000. The pyroclastic flows extended over 15 kilometers from the summit. Ash columns reached 17,000 meters. Despite these events, several 100,000 people continue to live within Merapi's established danger zone because the volcanic soil is extraordinarily fertile, because those families have farmed it for generations, and because the risk of periodic eruption is weighed against the daily economic reality of leaving. Merapi has a volcanic observatory monitoring its activity continuously, and evacuation protocols have improved substantially since 2010. But the fundamental tension between the fertility of volcanic land and its danger doesn't have a resolution. The mountain will erupt again. These places aren't meant to be understood from a distance. They're meant to be reckoned with. Every location you just traveled through, whether it was the acid lake in Java, the frozen streets of Oymyakon, or the world's most dangerous honey cliff, is a living argument against the idea that Earth is simply a backdrop for human activity. The planet has its own agenda. In some places, that agenda looks like beauty. In others, it looks like open lava, pyroclastic flow, or a tide that moves faster than you can swim. What connects all of these places is that people haven't left. They've stayed, adapted, built, and continued because the mine is there, because the glacier has to be crossed. After all, the honey has always been harvested. After all, the mountain is home. Human survival isn't just biological. It's stubbornness. It's refusal. And these places are where that refusal gets tested most completely. If there's a place on this list that stopped you, that made you want to know more, go deeper. Understand how anyone lives there. That feeling is the point. The world is wider, stranger, and more extreme than any algorithm will ever show you by default. Go find the edges.